Research and articles by Mr. Fordham appear in books Sweetgrass Baskets and the Gullah Tradition by Joyce Copley, South of Maine by Beatrice Hill and Brenda Lee, the Greenwood Encyclopedia of African American Folklore for the University of Missouri Press, Cecil Williams and Sonny DuBose, Orangeburg, 1968, and the Malcolm X Encyclopedia for the University of Southern Mississippi Press in 2001. He also commented on history and storytelling for numerous radio and television programs in the United States and the United Kingdom. His motto is, educate yourself to lead yourself. For if you wait on others to show you the way, you will wait for a long time. Without further ado, Mr. Damon Lamar Fordham.
That is so important that we always encourage the youth.
Yes.
Our problem is we're so busy putting them down that when they don't do the right thing, we wonder what happened. So let's go ahead and encourage this young man. Now, part of the reason I'm here is to talk to you a little bit about the background of this wonderful institution known as the Black Church. And that is so important because right now, many of our young people are being misled. There are people who are taking advantage of their bitterness and frustration and saying that the Black Church was the worst thing that ever happened to us, that it kept us in a slave mindset, and that we would be better off without it. Ladies and gentlemen, you and I all both know that is a lie.
Yes.
And our history proves otherwise. Yes, there were some aspects of it that may have been misused to keep a slave mentality and so forth, but that is one small part of the story. People often take what little piece suits their purposes and blow it up so that the unsuspecting mind will only know that side of the story. Well, ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters, boys and girls, I'm here to tell you the rest of the story.
Go ahead.
The Black Church goes even further back than our sojourn in the United States. If you look at 2 Kings 19, in the 9th chapter, with 2 Kings 19th chapter, 9th verse, it tells the story of a great Ethiopian. No, I didn't say Egyptian, I said Ethiopian. And where is Ethiopia? And so is Egypt, as a matter of fact. But when you say Ethiopia, there is no dispute on who or what you're talking about. About a great Nubian pharaoh by the name of Taharka, who helped the king of Israel fight off the warriors of Syria. And that story is mentioned, as I said, in 2 Kings 19, 9th verse. Numbers, 12th chapter, first verse, gives us one of the first known stories of racism, where it talks about Moses and his queen, Zipporah, and how Moses' brothers say, hey, what you doing marrying that Ethiopian woman as if she was beneath them and so forth. You also have Psalm 68 chapter, 31st verse, which teaches us that princes shall come out of Egypt, and Ethiopia shall stretch her hands before God. You have Acts 8 chapter, 27th verse, where it talks about Queen Candace of Ethiopia. So you also have to know that when you study history, you will see that the earliest Christian communities could be found in Egypt and Ethiopia. And yet you have people today who will tell us, man, what you doing with that white man's religion? I beg to differ. What I just said shows the truth about that situation. Now, however, in between that time and this, on the west coast of Africa, what happened was you had three great empires, the Ghana, the Mali, and the Songhai, between about 1200 AD and 1591 AD. And the last of these was the Songhai Empire, that was run by a king by the name of Askia Muhammad, whose kingdom was so powerful that on the west coast of Africa, it took up about as much land as the United States does in North America today. But as a popular song went when I was a child, that many of you may remember. What goes up must come down. As Rome rose, Rome fell. Greece rose, Greece fell. Egypt rose, and Egypt fell. And West Africa rose, and West Africa fell. But how? The last king they had, one of the last great kings they had was Askia Muhammad. And Askia Muhammad conquered enough land, as I said before, that had about as much land as the United States of America does today. But you see, the old folks are full of wise sayings. And one of them goes, smart parents have lazy children. And King Askia Muhammad had these lazy, trifling sons. And in 1528, the old king went blind from diabetes. And the lazy, trifling sons took over the throne, exiled the poor daddy where he died. And for the next 50 years, these trifling sons fought over the throne. Meanwhile, in Morocco, the Sultan of Morocco said, hey, Sangay's got all that gold, and his trifling sons are fighting over the throne. So he told one of the trifling sons, hey, if you let me come and take over, I'll make sure that you're the king. And the son was so ignorant that he believed that. Because the king of Morocco not only took over the throne, he had something that the people of Sangay didn't. Guns. So therefore the West African Empire fell. And at the same time, around the same time this was happening, Columbus was doing his thing in the Caribbean islands. He enslaved the American Indian. But then one of his men, Father Bartolomé de Casa, a Spanish priest, said, it's a sin and a shame what you are doing to the red children of God. So he had a solution to stop the slavery of the American Indian. Go to Africa and get the blacks. And that's how we wound up over here. I should add that when Father Bartolomé de Casa realized what he had did, he begged God for his forgiveness prior to his death. But our story here in South Carolina begins a little bit later than that. In about 1670, Captain Nathaniel Sale had a ship called, ironically, the Three Brothers. And aboard that came John, people were renamed John Jr., and Elizabeth. That's from Peter Wood's book, Black Majority. And that's the beginning of the black community in this area. Contrary to popular belief, the early slave masters did not want their slaves to become Christians at first. Why? Because then it would become harder to justify enslaving a person who was a fellow Christian. So around the same time you had these group of white people called the indentured servants. Those of you who study history know that these were the white people who would come here for 6 or 7 years to work off a debt or imprisonment. But there was a problem with the plantation owners. You see, these poor white indentured servants and these enslaved blacks, they were getting a little too close and chummy for the plantation owners. Then their biggest fear almost came true. In 1676, in Virginia, a man named Nathaniel Bacon tried to start Bacon's Rebellion, uniting the poor whites and the enslaved blacks against the plantation owners. And the plantation owners said, oh no, we can't have this mess happen again. So they brainwashed the poor whites into thinking that they were superior than the blacks. They divided and conquered the poor so that the rich could stay on top. That, ladies and gentlemen, is why you have racism. Wow. Now you know. So, some years after this, about in these mid-1700s, you had a person who you mentioned in passing in one of your quiz questions. George Lear was a slave born in Virginia, and he eventually was brought with his master to Georgia. George Lear became the first ordained African-American minister, and he went down to Savannah, and as they mentioned, he started the first African Baptist church. But in order to keep himself a free man, during the American Revolution, he left for Jamaica and became the first black missionary to take the gospel into the West Indies. But he left behind his associate, a black man from right here in Charleston by the name of Reverend Andrew Bryan. And Andrew Bryan became the first actual minister of the first African Baptist church in Savannah, Georgia, the first black church in America, first official pastor was a black man from right here in Charleston, Reverend Andrew Bryan. Now, one of the good things about that church, I should tell you, is that early on, these ministers knew that they should preach a gospel of liberation. So at First African Baptist Church, if you've ever been there, there is a room that they keep where they used to shelter runaway slaves on the Underground Railroad. And so if the authorities were to come into church, they wouldn't know where these people were. You can still see that room today. If anyone goes down there, you can see this. And meanwhile, back here in Charleston, several really interesting things happened. Over at a place called Hempstead AME Church, over on the east side, there was Reverend Morris Brown and one of his class leaders. See, y'all in the Baptist church, you have the class leaders, y'all have the deacons, and we have in the AME church have the class leaders. Okay? And one of the class leaders was Denmark Beasley. Denmark Beasley preached the gospel of liberation. He preached from Exodus 21:16, which teaches that he that stealeth a man and selleth him shall be put to death. He also taught Revelation 13:10, which teaches that he that leadeth into captivity shall be led into captivity. And so he tried to start the Great Slave Rebellion of 1822, but a man by the name of Peter Prelu, he ran back to the masters, told on him, and of course, he and 35 of his men were eventually hanged. But then you also had David Walker, who wrote David Walker's Appeal, who was from Wilmington, North Carolina, but spent some time in Charleston. And he used the Bible to explain why the African Americans should be free people. And he died of pneumonia in 1830. But the mayor of Savannah put a price on his head for writing things like this. And then further up in Virginia, Southampton County, you had Nat the Prophet, also known as Nat Turner, who started a slave rebellion and was caught. But before they hanged him, an interviewer said, "Nat the Prophet, you are a relatively privileged slave. Why did you want to start a rebellion like that?" And he answered with one simple answer: was Christ not crucified? So, around the same time this was happening, you had the American Colonization Society. They were trying to get rid of the free blacks because they thought they were a poor example for the people who were in slavery. They might give them ideas like freedom. But one of the great ministers of this time period, yes, I'm covering both Baptist and AME. I'm not leaving anybody out. But I'll be honest and admit, y'all were the first, so I'll give y'all that. But the first African-American denomination was founded by Richard Allen up in Philadelphia, when they refused to let him commune with the white congregants, started the AME Church. Richard Allen boldly said in a sermon before he died, "Here we were born, and here we will stay, and here we will fight to stay." So the church was started, and so the church was in the forefront in the fight for our freedom. Even back then, yes, there were masters who tried to, use certain verses to say that we should stay slaves and all of that stuff. But the fact of the matter was, many of them knew the power of the true gospel. And that is why it was against the law for African Americans to read and write. Because when they read things like the book of Exodus and the story of Moses and things of that sort, it gave them these ideas such as freedom. So you can't go along with this idea that the church kept us in slavery completely. So you also had people like Reverend Richard Harvey King, who came down here after slavery. And not only did he start Mother Emanuel AME Church, he was the founder of the town of Lincolnville, South Carolina. So African Americans could have self-government. You also had, with this type of thing going on, over at Morris Street Baptist Church, you had the great Reverend John L. Dart. John L. Dart, in 1898, he led an anti-lynching meeting over at Mother Emanuel, where he called upon the President of the United States to do something about the lynching of a black postmaster in Lake City by the name of Frazier Baker. And he was, believe it or not, he was criticized by members of his own community for going too far with this. But let me tell you a little something else about John L. Dart. John L. Dart also started a reading room. And he also, that's coming up, I'll get to that. You're right, but I'll get to that. He also started this reading room. And he also started a school called the Charleston College Industrial School. Who here goes to Burke High School? Who in here goes to Burke? Well, you should always remember the name of John L. Dart, because John L. Dart's Charleston College Industrial School was the foundation of what we know today as Burke High School. And he would always lend books out to black people in this area, to where he would always lend books out in this area. He would always lend books out to people in this area. And his daughter, after his death, started the first library for African Americans. And she named it after her father, the Reverend John L. Dart Library. One of your own, from Morris Street Baptist Church, the Reverend John L. Dart. This is the kind of legacy that the black church has left in this area. And throughout the civil rights movement, the majority of the great leaders came out of the church. And that's not just true for South Carolina. Over in Louisiana, you had the Reverend John Scott, who risked his life for the freedom of his people in getting them to register to vote, risking gunshots, the loss of employment, sheltering his friends and so forth at this very peril. His daughter is here today, Miss Cleo Scott Brown. Can you please stand? You always going to forget that. But another reason why I mentioned that is that Cleo wrote her father's story down in a book called Witness to the Truth. And I implore you, preserve our stories by writing them down to make sure that they are not cast in the midst of forgetfulness. Because we need these stories to inspire the people. And another thing for people who think that the black church may have hindered more than helped. Up in Spartanburg, the last time I saw Reverend Hope was at Mount Moriah Baptist Church in Spartanburg, which is where my family attended and so forth. And one of the pastors there was a Reverend Joel King in the 1940s. And he had a very intelligent nephew who, when the nephew was going through seminary, he would come there in 1948 in this church right here in South Carolina at the Mount Moriah Baptist in Charleston, in Spartanburg, gave one of the first known addresses before a congregation. His nephew, of course, was Martin Luther King. Wow. And another important reverend I must mention who was a great impact on his son, the Reverend Earl Little up in Michigan and in Wisconsin. During the days when we had the great freedom fighter Marcus Garvey, Earl Little sent a petition to the President of the United States demanding that Garvey became free. Well, Garvey was freed, but was sent back to Jamaica. Earl Little had seven children. One of them's name was Malcolm, who you know today as Malcolm X. So you see, when we speak of the black church, we cannot forget the bridge that brought us over. Now, the church is not perfect, but understand this. The church is not perfect because man is not perfect. And today, what you are doing by hosting this program with this youth mentoring program, you are continuing that tradition of addressing the needs of today. Because let's face it, one of our greatest crises that we face is the condition of our youth. But we have to be fair. They did not get that way by themselves. Many of us as adults have lost our way. And the children saw that many of us lost their way. So therefore, the branch, as we know, does not fall far from the tree. But just as following the wrong example got them in the condition that many of them in today, following the right example can turn them around. And I commend this church in doing its job by having a mentoring program so the young people could see if they have parents who are going down that wrong path, that there is a right way to go. So with that that you do us all a great favor. I want all of you to continue to do what is expected of us as people within our churches. So the young people could be inspired to take all of this to the next level.
Yeah.
So that not only programs like this will not be in vain, but we will have a better people and a better future. And in the words of the one who all of this is about in the first place, I will close with this. Thank you. Let's all give a stand ovation for Mr. Damon from Fordham. Wasn't that very